Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the WENTE debate. We're talking about whether the relationship between the United States and the European Union is changing, what with growing isolationism on both sides of the Atlantic. We're seeing this on the day when negotiations on a free trade deal, a TTIP deal, resume in New York City. With us to talk about it, journalist Alex Taylor. We're also in the company from Dallas, Texas, of a former advisor to the U.S. State Department's Bureau of European Affairs, Tyson Barker, joining us from Leicester in England. Margot Parker of the UKIP party. She is a member of the European Parliament, and Jakob Hessler, German entrepreneur who works here in Paris. Again, the campaign against that TTIP transatlantic free trade deal gaining strength, as evidenced by the big demonstrations seen in Hanover over the weekend. Delano de Souza has more.
It could impact the lives of 800 million people, making it the largest trade deal in the world. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, aims to scrap nearly all tariffs on goods traded between the US and the EU. And while leaders on both sides of the Atlantic are eager to clinch the deal before Barack Obama leaves office, getting the public on board has been a challenge.
These agreements unilaterally benefit big companies and lobby groups, while normal people and their lives are pushed into the background and become a tool for furthering the interests of big companies.
Pharmaceuticals, automobiles, energy and chemicals are just some of the industries TTIP will likely affect. Its aim is to boost the economies of Europe and the United States and create millions of jobs. There have been concerns, however, that the deal would lower the standards of consumer and environmental protection. For instance, produce from the United States could wind up on European shelves, bypassing stricter EU norms.
All right, lots of reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. America only ever wants something if it is because they will get more money than the other side. That's one viewer's opinion. What's Tyson Barker, your reaction to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is Obama made very clear in London that we're not interested in negotiating a free trade agreement with the UK, even though obviously there would be an asymmetric negotiation dynamic. We see these as two equal partners. The EU is the only partner equal to the United States in the world, the only advanced economy with the same market force. Our interest is really raising the standards to our level and then lowering unnecessary tariffs. I think this is it shouldn't be as controversial as it is, but our leaders are not making the forceful case. And because of that, it's allowing a lot of rumors and myths to kind of swirl about.
Is there a stronger anti-American sentiment than before?
You know, I think it's the same as it ever was. You know, when we deal with some of these issues, we talk about how anti-Americanism is different than it was 10 years ago, or the rise of anti-establishment parties is different than it was 10 years ago. Well, you know, during the Iraq War, the anti-American sentiment in Europe was pretty high. 10 years ago, you had Jean-Marie Le Pen make it to the second round in French presidential elections. So we're dealing with similar situations, but how we address these situations effectively and successfully will be a big test for our leaders.
Jakob Hessler?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think the key issue with that statement is I think it misunderstands the fundamentals of why nations trade. The nations trade because they themselves can make more money. It is not about making more money than the other side. That is the fundamental part. Yes, the Americans are doing a trade deal because they want to make more money. Now, that's why you do trade deals. Making more money than the other side in a trade deal when you look at the economics of trade, doesn't make sense. It is not logical. So the very fact is trade benefits both trading parties. So when you think about that is, you have European companies who will have greater ease to export into the US. The US is a huge export market, and the US has industries that wants to export more into Europe.
Jakob.
If we increase mutual exports, you increase well-being on both sides of the Atlantic. That's called the benefits of trade.
Jakob,
it's very simple.
in the report we saw, we heard
Yes.
that one German protester saying that this is only going to benefit large corporations. You work for a small firm that works in biotech. How will it
Well, I think
will it help you
for us,
personally?
we are a startup in biotech co-founded by a Harvard professor and a French business guy. Now, for us, we basically operate in France. We also operate somewhat in the US. It is still a bit complicated. And with TTIP and with the facilitation of operating on both sides of the Atlantic in terms of drug administration, drug trials, etc., if you could streamline this process, this would make it particularly easier for the smaller players to be bi-coastal. And I think the whole idea is to create more transatlantic players, is to lower the barriers to entry for the mid-size Europeans to be more active in the US and to be the mid-size US to be more active in Europe. And of course, that has an important side benefit, which is nations that trade and that intertwine ever more. That's what you want to create stability and peace. And I think it's worked in the past, and I don't see why it shouldn't work in the future, just because, and I think the comments we've heard about the big corporations and I think there's one important point that's been brought up all the time is this question, which is why I think the whole TTIP deal and the European public opinion got so out of hand. And that is this mysterious notion of the arbitration court, where if you invest, and the principle is actually very simple, and it protects companies on both sides, small and large, and it does something, is that it establishes a true transnational justice without incurring the humongous cost and the fact that it would actually be impossible to do that as a transnational court of justice. What it does is to say, if you invest as a European country in the US and in the state of Arkansas, the governor doesn't like your business, he revokes your license or does something that that violates the principle of the investment treaty, well, you have two choices. Today, of course, you can go and sue him in an American court in the state of Arkansas. Now, if you're a European company, go try. Go try. Are you going to find the right lawyers? Are you going to find the right procedures? It's very difficult. You're going to be facing a jury, or you're going to be facing a judge who is not necessarily sympathetic, who may even want to get elected on a ticket that is to say, I bash foreign companies because for whatever reason. So you can choose with TTIP, you can choose to invoke a neutral international arbitration panel. And the same thing applies to American companies. And I don't see why that would be less justice if it is applied in a rigorous way across both sides of the Atlantic.
Margot Parker, has Jakob Hessler convinced you to vote in favor of TTIP when it comes up before the European Parliament?
No. No, not at all. In fact, you know, we're very, very conscious of the large corporates and the power that they wield in this. I mean, you know, nobody's speaking up for the smaller companies. Yes, I heard the biotech guy, you know, I don't know how many people he employs, but, you know, I've got people that run very small companies in my constituency. Well, you know, maybe 1 to 10 people. They want to be able to do business in Europe. And do you know what? Sometimes they find it very difficult to be able to actually work in Europe. So they sell to Russia. You can't believe this.
Well,
because
exactly.
the EU doesn't make it easy for small businesses. So, you know, forgive the confusion. Well, yes, I think that's rather a big, you know, sort of statement. But more transparency. People are very suspicious. You know, we need to see a little bit more about the safeguards before anything goes further. And I would need to hear an awful lot more. And I haven't been convinced so far at all.
Somebody who at the beginning of our show, Tyson Barker, was saying that Hillary Clinton, the Democratic frontrunner, would be convinced, according to her advisors. But let's take a closer look now. She'd expressed hope that TTIP could become, quote, an economic NATO. And back in 2012, she praised plans for a trans-Pacific free trade deal, one that's since been approved. She called it at the time the gold standard in trade agreements. Now that TPP has been signed, though, Hillary Clinton has changed her mind.
We've learned a lot about trade agreements in the past years. Sometimes they look great on paper. I know when President Obama came into office, he inherited a trade agreement with South Korea. I, along with other members of the cabinet, pushed hard to get a better agreement. We think we made improvements. Now looking back on it, it doesn't have the results we thought it would have in terms of access to the markets, more exports, et cetera.
Tyson Barker, are you sure that Hillary Clinton is for TTIP?
She supports TTIP wholeheartedly. The issue that we're talking about here is we don't have a text yet. I mean, the negotiations aren't finished. So once negotiations are finished, and I think that this is something we really need to step back and think about in our democracies, is it needs to be subject to the astringent effects of public discussion and debate and votes in our parliament. But until we have texts, which we do have for TPP now, and that's why she said, you know, there are some areas that I find aren't strong enough. She supports TPP in theory as well. But if she wins the presidency, there are things that she's going to want to revisit.
Let me ask you, Alex Taylor, because at that meeting that took place in Hanover today, going into the meeting, the French president, very adamant, saying that he has strong objections, most notably when it comes to protecting France's agriculture, France's labels.
Well, there's nothing new with that. There's always been a problem with France's agriculture.
But he was talking about a veto, and so was his industry minister.
Listen, we're talking about one of the most complicated things you can talk about. Two huge blocks, 500 million people in the European Union, trying to come to some arrangement.
But we didn't hear Hollande gushing about TTIP the way that Jakob Hessler.
I haven't heard anybody apart from Johan gushing about TTIP. It's incredibly hard it's incredibly hard to come to agreements. That's why we're going into the 13th round to try and sign this TTIP thing. But on the other hand, I think the question everybody ought to ask, and it's a question that I would ask to our friend from UKIP, is that, okay, it's very difficult to come to these arrangements, and we're trying our best. But what is the alternative to this? Everybody signing up bilateral agreements, everybody going back into their own little world, creating frontiers for trade, Britain withdrawing from the European Union, having a bilateral agreement with Sweden about toffees, and having an agreement with the Americans, which is going to be extremely hard to negotiate if we believe the current and the probably future American president. What is the alternative to this? Obviously, it's hard. There are going to be winners and losers. We've heard them in your report about what's happening in Germany. It's never easy. It's massively difficult to get this thing going, but it's better than the alternative. I think that's the situation.
Well, I don't agree. I mean, I've just given you a figure that Britain is now selling, I think it's 19.3% now, with no trade arrangement to the United States. That's with nothing. We're still trading. So you can trade with the rest of the world. I mean, you guys are talking and pitching us into some very small corner. We're not. The rest of the world is there for us to trade with. I mean, clearly we can and we do. If we can get a decent trade arrangement, of course, that's beneficial and that's what we would work towards. But we wouldn't stop us trading. That's what I'm saying.
Well, why did the President of the United States go out of his way to come to Britain this weekend?
Of course, we can't trade. Listen.
Well, why did the President of the United States go out of his way to come to Britain this weekend to say that Britain would be in the back of the queue for any future trade? Why did he say that? Why did Hillary Clinton, who's probably going to be the next president, agree with him?
That was a lame... Wait a minute. No.
Why did he say? Who dictates
that was
to
a
Barack
lame
Obama?
American president that wants to go out on a high.
And what about Hillary Clinton, who agreed with him the next day?
I imagine he wanted to please David Cameron. Don't be... Well... You know, not necessarily. She's also coming into office, so she just doesn't want to fall out with the British government.
So the current president of the United States doesn't know what he's talking about, and the probable future of the president of the United States doesn't know what she's talking about.
No.
And you know better than both of them about what America
came
wants.
over. He played an outrageous game. He played an outrageous card by insulting the British electorate. How dare somebody else come and tell us how to vote? Do I pop over to America and say, oh, by the way, you need to vote this way? No.
Could I just make one point?
When the United States States, opens its border, no, let me make a point. You made plenty. Let me make one. If the United States has an open border, by the way, with Mexico, and it has its Supreme Court in Canada, you know what? They might just be able to tell us something. But to actually come in and tell people how to vote, outrageous.
No, it's not
acceptable.
Outrageous at all.
Shocking.
Can I just make just one very important point, because a lot of Americans are watching us. I think if you visit the cemeteries throughout Europe of the hundreds of thousands of young Americans who lost their lives during 2 world wars, which were set up through Europe, to say that it's outrageous that an American president doesn't even have the right to say what he and his country think about us leaving the European Union and the instability. Could you let me finish, please? I let you finish. To say that the American president doesn't...
let me please reply.
I haven't finished my point yet. I let you finish. To say that the American president doesn't have the right to give his opinion and to say what he thinks would happen if instability, and the instability for Britain leaving the European Union will be very great, because the European Union and other countries are watching very closely.
Nonsense.
And the European... France, the Front National is very interested in Brexit because they want to have a referendum here.
She's coming,
and to say that the American president doesn't have the right to intervene after 2 world wars, which they've had to come in and save our continent, I think you're outrageous, not him.
Listen. I'm not outrageous. Let me tell you, I have a brother I never knew buried in France because he lost his life in the last war.
I do too, madam.
So
my uncle, I didn't know him either.
We are very, 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 very aware. We're very, very aware of the loss of lives. So at the end of the day, don't trivialise the loss of life. It's very, very important.
How dare you? I've got an uncle I didn't know either. I'm not trivialising. I'm just saying they have to...
One at a time. Margot Parker. Quick question for you.
I didn't hear that last question.
Because I haven't given you that. Margot Parker, one of the bookmakers in the United Kingdom, after Barack Obama's anti-Brexit pitch that he made last Friday while in Britain, saying that the chances of the UK staying in the EU have jumped 10%. What's your reaction to that?
I would say he came 2 months before Brexit. It's a roller coaster ride. You know, 1 week we do very, very well, and people say, right, the polls are showing that it's neck and neck, or we're ahead a little. I think this is exactly the symptom of exactly the same visit. You know, a very important man comes. He gives you a pronouncement. He's invited by the British Prime Minister. At the end of the day, they want a deal. TTIP is important to him, so he comes over, interferes in our election, our referendum, which we fought 20, 40 years to get. So it's a critically important time for people to have their say. Very, very important. And democracy is very important. You know, we want our laws made in Westminster. So this is a big issue for us. And he's given his advice. Fine. OK, thank you. We've heard what you've got to say. But, you know, we don't interfere in your process. We don't tell you how you should run your country. I think it's wrong to actually come over here and tell us how we should vote. Completely unacceptable, in my view.
Tyson Barker, your thoughts on that? Was Barack Obama right to weigh in on the Brexit debate?
Well, I think it's unfortunate to characterize it as interfering. You know, I think what he was doing is saying that the UK is one of, if not the most important strategic partner the United States has in the world. And we have views on this issue, just like many countries have views on our domestic politics, because our domestic politics affect the global political system. You know, there have been candidates, or let me say prime ministers and presidents, Matteo Renzi, for example, who has basically endorsed Hillary Clinton. This happens all the time. We know that the decision on the referendum will be made in the voting booth by British citizens, not by Americans, not by people in Brussels, but by British citizens. All we want to do is say, for us on the other side of the Atlantic, it enhances your global influence to be part of the EU, because you're our EU whisperer. You explain the EU to us, and you explain us to Brussels. So for us, it's very, very important.
Nonsense.
I think there's an important point.
Absolutely.
I think there's an important point that you just mentioned, which is, if you look at countries that are outside of the EU today, and who are actually admittedly quite happy to be, take the case of Switzerland, for example. It's outside of the EU or Norway. It's trading, of course it does. But in fact, it is continuously accepting with being very marginally consulting the vast majority of whatever the EU legislation is all about. Now imagine that situation is sort of acceptable because there are some countries within the EU that still defend a more liberal view of free trade. Now imagine what will happen if the UK leaves the EU. It will have to eat up all that the European legislation anyways, but it will not be there as a voice for free trade anymore. So what will happen is that Southern Europe, with a slightly more protectionist agenda, will dictate more laws, and that will be to the detriment of Germany, of Sweden, of all the northern European countries, which is why me as German, I say, please stay, because we need you to keep Europe more of a free trade and open economy, which we might not be able to in the same way.
All right, one man who definitely is leaving is Barack Obama. As he gets set to do so, he remains more popular here in Europe than any of our own leaders. In a survey, well, this was updated last June by Pew, the French seem to like him as much as they disapprove of their own president's handling of affairs. Of course, whoever the president will be next, I guess it's fair to say, Alex Taylor, they won't be as popular as Obama on this continent.
I think Obama's been very popular, probably because he's done a very good job. I think that he had every right to be concerned about what's going to happen. I'm sorry to come back to the theme, but it's absolutely why he came and said that. It wasn't to interfere or to do a favor.
With a different U.S. president, will it be the same relationship between the EU and the United States?
No, obviously it changes according to the personality and according to the special relationships. But I think that the relationship between the United States and Europe will be very affected if Brexit happens. I think that's a major reason why Obama came. And as ever, the UKIPers don't think about what's going to happen in the future. Because if Great Britain withdraws, there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on countries like Sweden, the Netherlands and France to withdraw. Marine Le Pen is listening very closely. I talked about her last week on French television. She rang up immediately. She's listening to all this. She wants to go to Britain to persuade the British to leave so that we can have a referendum in France. If Europe starts dissolving and following the British model, if we do Brexit, and then we all end up with little countries all having their own trade wars with each other, that's infinitely important to America.
Margot Parker, final word on this. Marine Le Pen, the head of the French far right, would you be happy to see her come and campaign for the Brexit?
She wants to.
No. I mean, Marine Le Pen is important in France. Not on my side. Please do not make and muddy the water. It's not acceptable. You know, I wouldn't dream of going to France and interfering with Marine Le Pen's campaigning. And just as I held the same view with the President of the United States, actually coming in and I believe making critically political comments which were not necessary. I'm sure President Barnett, charming man that he is, clearly he is, but it's more important for us to actually have our democracy and our laws actually made in Westminster, because the people cannot vote for what we've got in the European Union because we have an appointed commission. So there is no democracy. So I'm a passionate believer in democracy. No. You know we don't have the power. We have 8.4%.
You're a member of the European Parliament.
Are you kidding
Somebody
me?
voted
what
for
do you
you,
think
for
we're going to do with that? Serious issues?
You were a member of the European Parliament.
Serious issues. 4 billion people voted for us. We are.
You're a member of the European Parliament.
We have
you were voted for.
You're not listening.
It's
all we have.
It's
It's not much power. You don't seem to hear what I'm saying to you. We don't have the power. We don't have the power. Do you get it? 8.4%.
We're definitely going to revisit the issue. Unfortunately, the clock has run out for this time. Margot Parker, I want to thank you, but we'll definitely be revisiting between now and June 23rd this issue. I also want to thank Tyson Barker for being with us from Dallas, Jakob Hessler and Alex Taylor. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. Just a quick look at how the whole TTIP debate is playing out on social media. We don't have much time, but just to quickly take the pulse, if you like, the buzz is really overwhelmingly negative on social media. This is because a lot of associations that oppose the trade deal really have dominated the discussion on social media. Two sort of key issues coming forth. There seems to be a clear linking of the trade deal with the idea that it's not democratic, that it is undercutting the, I suppose, court systems within Europe, and that it is putting in place a parallel sort of corporate court system. This is the discourse that is coming back again and again on social media. Also, that these are negotiations that have been taking place behind closed doors. They are two themes that come back again and again. So this is just an example of the kind of tweets you're seeing online. They're all con games, so that's TTIP, or its French equivalent, the French acronym TAFTA. Con games for deregulation and privatization to overrule communities. So you can see the tone of it. One organization called Stop TTIP has been very active on social media as well, and indeed partly helped to probably bring about a decision by local authorities and local governments in Barcelona earlier this month to actually step outside of this trade deal at the local government level. So you're seeing French regions such as Languedoc-Roussillon, Midi-Pyrénées saying we are what would you say, an outside of TTIP zone. So this is sort of undercutting, I suppose, the attempts at a national...
A region with a big farm lobby as well.
That's exactly it, and that's one of the major, I suppose, concerns in France in terms of how it might impact on agriculture. So just a quick look again at public support, which of course has been impacted by all of that, the associations generating a lot of discussion about it on social media. It has plummeted in the space of just a year or so. There is one German study by the Bertelsmann Foundation which shows that 1 in 5 Germans think that the TTIP is a good thing, when in fact about 55% of Germans were in favour of it 2 years ago, and so you see similar trends in the US. So public support dropping quite significantly. Now, the positive elements that you're seeing on social media are largely coming from EU institutions themselves or EU websites. Euractiv.com talking about how this is good for small and medium businesses. That's a message coming through, but you're seeing much less of that on getting an echo on social media, for example, or graphics from the European Commission or the European Parliament depicting, I suppose, flags blending, handshakes and whatnot. But really, the positive buzz is not getting the same sort of echo or traction on social media.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creed. Once again, I want to thank our panel. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.